This is the Pale Man, a child-eating albino demon who guards one of the keys to the underworld. His design is really strange. You can tell the moment you look at him that he is not a typical monster. He has some kind of difficult-to-place depth, but he's also just so spectacularly weird to look at, it's hard to even think past what you see on the outside. The sagging skin, the featureless face, the eyes in the palms of his hands. Why is he like this? What even is he? When Pan's Labyrinth first came out almost a decade ago, I imagine it felt pretty subversive. This fairy tale that is not a fairy tale, simultaneously full of fantasy and grim reality. It was a challenging, visionary piece of art back then. Now, it's a classic. It's become part of the language of film and storytelling, a piece of art creatives look to when they think about how to use fantasy to explore reality. It lives up to the timeless legacy of the fairy tales that inspired it, but out of the entire world of its story, this single image, the Pale Man, seems to be uniquely haunting. It's only in the movie for one scene, and yet, look, here we are, almost 20 years later, making a whole YouTube video about it. And we aren't the only ones. I think the truth about this iconic monster, the reason it sticks in your head this way and refuses to leave, is because, despite appearances, it's not really a monster. Building a world? Writing a story? Planning an RPG campaign? Got some big idea in your head that you just can't quite figure out how to make a reality? Well, here's a solution. Just use World Anvil. It has everything you need to make your ideas a reality in one website. No download required. Visit worldanvil.com/TaleFoundry and use code TaleFoundry to get 51% off a 1-year membership. So worth it to make world building fun again. A big thanks to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. Okay, saying that the Pale Man is not a monster might seem a little ridiculous because, look at him. Skin hanging off his bones, atrophied to the point that it's hard to tell whether there's any muscle tissue beneath his dangling flesh at all, a thin misting of dried blood on his hands and chin. This is a design that screams hunger, starvation, death. He sits alone at the head of a massive banquet table, brimming over with decadent foods, pristine and untouched. Though beautifully carved from stone, his lair is also surprisingly claustrophobic, ceilings lower to the ground than you would expect for a hall this ornate. In the domed space above the table, there are murals which show him murdering and consuming small children. He appears to be almost catatonic, waiting motionless for his next meal. There's no clear indication how long he's been waiting when we encounter him, save, perhaps, his emaciated shape. Has he been wasting away? Has it been so long since the last child wandered into his lair? We have to assume from the piles of children's shoes surrounding him and the prodigious slack of his loose skin that he was once a much larger creature, with far more frequent opportunities to feed. There is one key rule for anyone who enters the Pale Man's lair: do not be tempted by the banquet. For if you eat anything from it, even just one grape, he will awaken and he will be hungry. It's quite disturbing to watch him break out of his stasis, actually. His joints move like machine parts, freeing themselves from years of rust. His eyes, which he keeps on a small plate before him when he's not using them, slot into the palms of his hands. He hobbles toward his victims, feeling the air with his hands, searching and trying to grab hold in the same spastic motion. He is not a graceful or well-poised creature. Everything he does seems laborious and clumsy, almost painful. but in his single-minded hunger, he is nevertheless terrifying. And typically, once you're trapped in his lair with him, there is no escape. Kind of a classic fairy tale ogre with a lot of interesting quirks. The role of these monsters in their respective stories is often to punish disobedience. Look in Bluebeard's secret closet, you get chopped to bits. Make too much racket in your long haul, and you get to meet the Grendel. I don't think that parallel was an accident. On the surface, the sequence sort of reads as a test of obedience, and if you do read it that way, then it's a scene where our hero, Ophelia, fails the test and still manages to get away. That's what this whole scene looks like on the surface. In that context, the Pale Man is absolutely a monster. But for Ophelia, he is also far more than that. Now, this is a video about the Pale Man in particular, and I promise we'll come back to him. I'm not trying to break down every symbol or character in the movie. I think we need at least an hour, probably more for that. Trust me, this movie is so dense. But in order to truly understand this thing, you do have to understand a little bit about the broader story, too. The movie starts with a fairy tale about the princess of the underworld, Moana. In the story, she visits the human world, where the sunlight blinds her and erases her memory. She eventually dies there, a mortal, lost to her people and her realm. But the king of the underworld does not give up hope. He believes one day her spirit will come back, reincarnated in the body of another little girl. He builds stone labyrinths around the world to act as portals for her return, and devises a set of trials to test the soul and make sure it really is her. Ophelia, he believes, is that little girl. The movie is, in the simplest possible terms, the story of her facing his trials. That's the magical side of it, Ophelia's side. It's only half the picture. The other half is the grim reality of a little girl living under a fascist regime. The movie takes place in Franco-Estera Spain, 1944, after the Spanish Civil War. Ophelia and her mother have just moved to a military outpost with Ophelia's new stepfather, Captain Vidal, a military officer under the fascist dictator Francisco Franco. Vidal is ruthless and laser-focused on his ambitions. He's here to find and rout out rebels hiding in the mountains, and to see that Ophelia's mother delivers him a son to carry on his legacy. In his world, there is no room for imagination, creativity, compassion, joy, and especially not disobedience. It should be immediately clear that Vidal and Ophelia occupy two entirely different worlds. His is the world of rules, rigidity, dogmatism, control. Things are the way that they are, and that is as it should be. The director, Guillermo del Toro, made a point of choosing a colder, darker color palette for this harsh, real-world environment. Everything is sort of dim and utilitarian here. It is a world of right angles. While discussing this in an interview, the interviewer quoted a famous artist to del Toro. "The straight line is godless," he said. And del Toro really seemed to love that. "The straight line," he replied, "is an obsession with perfection, and perfection is unattainable. Perfection is a conceit. Perfection actually lies in fully loving the defect. I think that's perfection." This is something that Vidal, and by extension the side of humanity he represents, could never understand or embrace. And so his world reflects it. A world of perfect right angles, and famine, and corpses, and broken pocket watches. Meanwhile, throughout the movie, whenever Ophelia accesses it, we see that the world of fantasy is almost the complete opposite. It's still dark at the edges, but it's allowed to be asymmetrical, imperfect, whimsical. Del Toro says that he drew inspiration from the artist Arthur Rackham to design it, and you can definitely see that when you look at his illustrations, the almost grotesque amount of line work juxtaposed against pretty faces and enchanting landscapes. Del Toro says that he intentionally chose, quote, uterine curvilinear architecture and a warm fallopian color palette for these sets. He admits that he's somewhat seduced by the idea that the womb is the ultimate place of comfort and built these scenes to reflect that. In fact, the first time we enter the world of fantasy in the movie, it's through the womb of Ophelia's mother, as Ophelia tells her unborn baby brother a story. If you haven't noticed yet, gender is kind of a big thing in this movie. There are other great videos out there which take the time to disambiguate between all the different characters and how they fill different gendered archetypes and roles, which is an interesting conversation. Del Toro himself has said that he sees war and fascism as boys' games. But again, we're here to talk about the Pale Man, not every other character in the movie. And the Pale Man is a man, yes, but he's also a creature. Notably, one without genitalia. It seems clear to me that Del Toro has gone to pains to draw up a strong comparison between two human traits in this movie, and that masculinity and femininity are the symbols by which he's identified them, but I don't ultimately think the movie is about gender. No matter how much female anatomical language he uses to describe the world of fantasy, or how much emphasis he puts on the masculinity of the violent, controlling reality of patriarchal authority, I think, in the end, this is actually about freedom, not chromosomes. Even fascism itself here can be taken as a broader symbol for all forms of homogenizing, subjugating authoritarian institutions, the very will to power itself. As Freud put it, the destructive urge. As his students put it, the distrudo, which of course has its natural opposite in the creative urge, the libido. I'll admit, I'm not much for Freud at all, but I do think there is something to this dichotomy. Traditionally, across cultures, distrudo has been tied to masculinity and libido tied to femininity. I think people do take this association for granted. Men are cast as the warriors, women as the homemakers. You can hardly blame Del Toro for using the tools at his disposal. It seems obvious. But when we do get past the genderization here, I do actually think Pan's Labyrinth is such a wonderful exploration of these two powerful impulses that all human beings have. And I think that's where the Pale Man starts to make a lot of sense as a monster. See, throughout the movie, these two worlds go out of their way to avoid each other. We have moments of the fantastique where we might see the fawn against the cold color palette of reality, or a mandrake root squealing in pain when no one but Ophelia is looking. Intrusions of the libidinous fantasy world into reality. But rarely, if ever, do we see the opposite. Reality has no claim on fantasy in this movie. The world of the libidinous is sacred, and only accessible to those with the true will to do so, like Ophelia. With the exception, of course, of one character. One destructive element that finds its way into the fantasy. The Pale Man. Near the start of the video, I described the monster as he appears. But, with context, those qualities begin to take on a deeper, more symbolic meaning. He is a gaunt, emaciated figure sitting alone at a feast for one. The table doesn't even have chairs for other guests. He's not even interested in the food. He's interested in the people who want it. Compare that visual to this shot of Vidal sitting at a similarly dressed table, enjoying a fine meal while he and his guests talk about how to ration food to those starving under their regime. The parallels are, frankly, hard to miss. But where Vidal is an attractive, fit, well-dressed, poised man of rank, the Pale Man almost seems weak, vulnerable, which I think was a somewhat deliberate decision. Here, look at these early sketches. Watch how the character moves from overtly menacing and violent to this rail-thin, hobbling, nearly blind thing. Pathetic is almost a word I'm tempted to use here. Ophelia isn't even really that scared when she first sees him. She even walks right up to him and grabs the little dish his eyes are resting on to have a better look. Mariana Colleen over on the YouTube channel The Morbid Zoo, which is fantastic by the way, describes the Pale Man not as a representation of Vidal, but rather of Vidal's soul, which is, of course, ugly by comparison. A weak, naked, blind thing driven single-mindedly by the desire to consume those within its power to reach? Sounds familiar, doesn't it? But it also has some of its own qualities unique from Vidal. The slits in its palms, prior to the insertion of its eyes? Where have I seen that visual before? Del Toro has said that the Pale Man represents the church for him, and fascism, and institutional racism, and the patriarchy. So, not just Spain's brand of fascism from the middle of the 20th century, but really, this is all institutional evils which feed on the helpless. In describing a world that, to him, seems to be ever more politically attuned to its destructive impulses, he has said, "These are Pale Man times." If you pay attention, you'll notice one of the few times Ophelia encounters any actual violence in the movie is when the Pale Man, like Goya's famous painting of Saturn eating his son, devours the heads of two of her fairy companions right in front of her. Del Toro said that it was important Ophelia not see some overt, violent act performed by Vidal that would traumatize her and potentially give her a full understanding of his evil. And there are plenty she could have witnessed, make no mistake. The others in the film see these things, but are somewhat desensitized, lulled, for the most part, into obedience and conformity. It was important Ophelia not have the same experience, that she encounter this concept in her world, the world of fantasy. So, then, the Pale Man is not just some monster who eats disobedient children. Rather, he's what an 11-year-old girl sees when she looks at fascism, at institutional evil itself in all its forms. I said at the start of the video that the Pale Man isn't really a monster. If you watch carefully, you'll notice some strange things about him. During the Pale Man scene, we watch him bite the heads off of two fairies, but in an interview, Del Toro points out that those exact same fairies are there with the fawn in the final scene when Ophelia at last returns to the underworld, which suggests that somehow the scene wasn't entirely real. Perhaps the dangers were something of a ruse. According to Del Toro, the fawn is the Pale Man. I don't think he means that literally. I don't think it's that wacky of a twist. I think what he means is that the fawn, the character who is supposed to be her guide throughout the movie, is ultimately really there to trick her. These trials he's been giving Ophelia, they aren't designed to see whether she will obey. They're designed to see whether she will break the rules and find her own way to the right decision. If the Pale Man is intended to be an educational experience for Ophelia, a meaningful and necessary part of her trial, then I take this as her opportunity to see the evils of the destructive impulse, to see its objective ugliness and hunger up close, and to still be attracted to what it's offering. I don't try to make her into a little adult, says Del Toro. She is 11. She's hungry. She eats the grape. Does that make her stupid? In a Hollywood movie, it would. In Pan's Labyrinth, she's a flawed character. The Pale Man, as scary as he may be, is an opportunity for Ophelia. A chance to see institutional evil in a way that she can understand. A chance to feel attracted to it. A chance to discover how dangerous that attraction is, without having to be permanently traumatized in the process. Many people never get that opportunity. By the time they understand the system of oppression they live in, they've already been consumed by it. So, in a way, more than just a scary monster with a really unique design, for both Ophelia and us as an audience, the Pale Man is really something of a kindness. This has got to be one of my favorite monsters in any movie ever. The amount of intricacy Del Toro put into the world of Pan's Labyrinth just takes my breath away. It honestly just makes me want to go work on my own world. And yes, I am sort of building a little world on the side, just as a fun personal project. It's called Somnium, and it's basically a future where everyone uploads their minds to the internet, and then the singularity occurs, and everyone gets trapped in one big kaleidoscopic shared fever dream forever. I love the idea of it, and I want to work on this so badly. But when I think about managing history and the whole cast of characters and every little piece of information about a world this big and this weird, I'll be honest, I get a little paralyzed. I even ended up putting the project down for about 4 months or so, just because I didn't really know where to start with it. But I have actually been tinkering with it again, and shockingly, I am actually having a lot of fun. It feels how it should have felt from the start, and I have our sponsor, World Anvil, to thank for that. That's kind of what World Anvil does. It turns world building from a massive, nigh insurmountable challenge into something fun. Instead of juggling mountains of post-it notes, sprawling Word documents, or, God help you, 3-ring binders, you can literally do everything in one website. That's right, you don't even have to download an app. World Anvil is basically just a big toolbox that gives you everything you need to cut loose and create. You can build articles that link together like a wiki, add interactive elements to your maps to help people navigate your world, build entire RPG campaigns, your own personal RPG characters, track timelines, make to-do lists for your project. There's even a whiteboard feature that you can use for visualizing your ideas before you build them out. Whether you're a gamer, a writer, or just someone who wants to organize the vastness of the worlds in your head, World Anvil is an incredible way to boil all of that down into something fun. Oh, and when you're ready, the site makes it easy to share your creations with anyone you want to as well. Your friends, peers, the general public, even paying customers. And if you don't want to share it at all, set your world to private and not even the site's creators will get to see it. Your ideas are safe here. So, if you're like me and you have an idea in your head that you love, but you just can't quite figure out how to realize, this is your call to stop waiting, because the tools are right here in front of you. Normally, you can get access to almost all of World Anvil for about $7 a month, but if you sign up for a year using the code Foundry at checkout, you'll get a whopping 51% off, which comes out to less than $5 a month. Seriously, for less than the price of your standard streaming service, you could be creating worlds. I have no idea how long this offer is going to last, so I would hurry up and sign up now. Again, visit worldanvil.com/TaleFoundry, sign up for a 1-year membership, and use code TaleFoundry at checkout to get 51% off. It's hard to describe how good it feels for world building to just be fun again. I hope you'll give this a try and see for yourself. I can't wait to see all the worlds you create. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye!